Have you ever had one of those very ordinary days where you woke up, ate breakfast, drank your coffee, brushed your teeth, just like you normally would? Unbeknownst to you, just how pivotal that day would be in shaping the course of your life. If something happens that just changes the direction of everything. I don't think there was a whole lot of ordinary life for the early church. I think they met each day with an eager anticipation for what God had in store. Healings, miracles, life transformation has a tendency to remove the ordinary from life. But nonetheless, in Acts 13, we're told of what was probably a fairly ordinary occurrence in the church in Antioch. There was worship, and prayer, and fasting. It was what they did. And Luke tells us now in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers. Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." So after they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. The commentators often remark on the diversity of leadership exhibited by the early church. Barnabas was a Jewish believer from Cyprus. Simeon was called Niger. His name means black or dark. He was probably from Africa. Likewise, Lucian came from Cyrene, that is North Africa. Then there's Manaen. He was a lifelong friend of Herod Antipas and likely related to the royal upper class. Lastly was Saul, brought up a Hebrew of Hebrews in Tarsus, but trained in Jerusalem. Religious and secular organizations in our day long for that kind of diversity at the top. Apparently, diversity just happens to be one of the many outworkings of the Spirit. They also demonstrated a diversity in spiritual gifting. There was teaching and prophetic utterance. We also know Barnabas had the gift of encouragement, and Paul spoke in tongues. The church in Antioch demonstrated the value of a plurality of leaders working from a plurality of spiritual gifting. This passage is a turning point of sorts in the book of Acts. The focus had loosely been on Peter for the last several chapters. It now turns to Paul as he and his companions launch off into the first of 3 missionary journeys. Not that this was Paul's idea. It was the Holy Spirit that called them. The Spirit that directed their sending. I do wonder if this came as a shock to the church. I mentioned a plurality of leaders, but clearly Paul and Barnabas were pivotal. Through Barnabas' Spirit-directed leadership, a great number were brought to the Lord. Additionally, Barnabas was the one who brought Paul, and through their combined teaching, the disciples in Antioch grew in number and Christ-likeness. Paul and Barnabas were essentially pastors, enjoying the experience of watching a congregation growing in faithfulness, generosity, and wisdom. I wonder if they woke up that morning, ate their cereal, thinking about the possibility of taking the gospel to the far reaches of the empire, of becoming missionaries. Oh, that's right, they weren't eating breakfast. They were fasting. Whatever their expectations were, there was a readiness, an eagerness to know and participate in that which God had in store. Their disciplines of worship, prayer, and fasting done in community speak of anticipation. Anticipation that God is up to something. Second, expectation. Expectation that whatever God's up to, he desires our participation. And so with anticipation and expectation comes preparation. And Paul and Barnabas, in community with others, were prepared spiritually for whatever God had in store for them. And because they had raised up other spiritual leaders, rather than sending out a young disciple who had completed his apprenticeship, the Spirit could send out 2 at the center. which either tells us something of the Spirit's value of mission or the dependence on the Spirit's role behind their growth, not upon the talent of the primary leaders. Or maybe it tells us something of both. What I think the passage tells us for today is that our participation in spiritual disciplines speaks loudly about what we believe God is up to in this world, whether we have a part to play in it. May God bless you in your ordinary or not so ordinary week.